So aggregate demand and supply. Aggregate demand. So aggregate demand is the amount of total spending on domestic goods and services in the economy. The aggregate demand curve will always be downsloping. So aggregate demand includes four components: demand, consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, export minus imports. So the demand is determined by a number of factors. One of them is the price level. So if there's an increase in consumption, aggregate demand will shift right. Increase in investment, aggregate demand will shift right. Increase in government spending, aggregate demand will shift right. Net exports increase, aggregate demand will shift right. So that will be an increase in aggregate demand. But if any of those decrease, aggregate demand will shift left, and that'll be a decrease in aggregate demand. So more consumption, more investment, more government spending, more net exports. That's good for aggregate demand. So the aggregate demand curve, an aggregate demand curve shows the total spending on domestic goods and services at each price level. The horizontal axis shows real GDP, and the vertical axis shows price level. So why is the demand curve downsloping? We'll go through that today. What is aggregate demand? Total amount of spending on domestic goods and services and economy. So domestic means inside the country. Yeah. So it's spending. It's focused on spending. In this case, yeah. So what does the aggregate demand curve show? So in this case, a downward slope, yes, that's part of it. Yeah, downward slope. Relationship between price level in the economy and total quantity of goods demanded, yes. As price level goes down, quantity demanded goes up for goods, which makes sense because everyone wants to buy things less expensive. So GDP, and I can't remember that. That's okay. So yeah, so we'll go through that as this today. So GDP and the price level change in relationship, yes. So yeah, GDP and price level. So as prices go down, GDP goes up in that case. So I kind of answered this question in the previous answer. So why is aggregate demand downsloping? 10 more seconds I'll give. So as price level falls, demand rises. Do the wealth change in consumption, interest rate, and exchange rate effects because it's based on price level GDP. Interest rate effect, lower price, reduce demand for money. Because as price rises, demand decreases. So, yes. So, like one more to add in, as price rises, quantity demanded decreases. So, anything on the graph we'll call quantity demanded. Here. So as price rises, quantity demanded decreases. That's great. Because quantity demanded and price are inverse. That's true. So as price rises, quantity demanded decreases because everything becomes more expensive. You don't want to buy as much. If price lowers, quantity demanded increases because it's cheaper and you want to buy more because it's cheap. So what are the components of demand? So yeah, consumption, investment, net exports, and government spending. So it's all four of those things. All those four things are good for economic growth. So that's key. So yeah, as you can see here, price is on the y-axis and the x-axis is real GDP. We need a title. So that's the one thing that's missing. So as price goes down, quantity of real GDP goes up. While if price goes up, quantity of real GDP goes down in this case for aggregate demand. So that's the graph for aggregate demand here. So shifts to the aggregate demand curve. Shifts to the left would be a decrease in aggregate demand. So that would, like, think recession. So shift to the left would be a recession. So that would be declining consumer spending, contractionary fiscal policy. So that just means that government spending goes down or taxes go up. That's what contractionary fiscal policy means. So government spending goes down or taxes go up. Contractionary monetary policy, that means they reduce the money supply and raise interest rates. So contractionary monetary policy is when they increase interest rates or reduce the money supply. Shifts to the right are increased consumer spending, expansionary fiscal policy, which means more government spending, less taxes. That's expansionary fiscal policy. So more government spending, less taxes. Expansionary monetary policy is when they increase the money supply and or reduce interest rates. So those are things that they can do to improve the economy. So a demand shock is an important change somewhere in the economy that affects many spending decisions and causes a sudden and unexpected shift in the aggregate demand curve caused by changes to technology, diseases, and natural disasters. So better technology will grow the economy. So if technology gets better, aggregate demand can shift right. Diseases and natural disasters can make aggregate demand shift left. So any natural disaster, disease, massive reductions in aggregate demand. So when COVID-19 happened, the pandemic, the reduction in aggregate demand was historic. I've never seen anything like it. The reduction in aggregate demand was record breaking. The economy never shrank that much ever. I've seen based on the data than what happened during the pandemic in that first 2 quarters. So yeah, the global pandemic can really cause a massive recession. So what shifts aggregate demand to the right? Select all and apply. So yeah, so increased consumer spending, expansionary fiscal monetary policy, both of those can shift aggregate demand to the right, while declining consumer spending would shift to the left, because that would be less spending and that wouldn't be good for the economy. What shifts aggregate demand to the left? Select all that apply. So yeah, declining consumer spending would shift aggregate demand to the left because that can cause recessions in some cases. Contractionary fiscal monetary policy, so raising taxes, reducing government spending, reducing the money supply, raising interest rates, that can slow down the economy, cause a recession. So that would shift the aggregate demand to the left. Expansionary fiscal policy would be increasing government spending or reduction in taxes, which would actually shift aggregate demand to the right. So the first two, declining consumer spending, contractionary fiscal monetary policy, that would shift aggregate demand to the left. So what is a demand shock? And feel free, for these questions, feel free to do searches. You can use generative AI to help you. Feel free to do that. So yeah, a sudden or unexpected shock that causes changes in aggregate demand. That's great. That's a great explanation. Unexpected event that increases or decreases demand for product temporarily. That's great. Something that causes a large and sudden increase or decrease in demand. That's great. Sudden change in the economy which impacts spending and shift in the aggregate demand curve can be caused by a change in technology or a natural disaster. Excellent. It's sudden change in demand that can have great consequences. Excellent. A change in economy that significantly changes consumer spending, pandemic or technological advancements. So great points there. So what causes demand shocks? So you stated some in the previous question. Feel free to state those again. Those are some very good reasons for demand shocks in the previous question. So one thing that causes demand shock is something major like event like COVID. Yes. So massive demand shock. The numbers are, so that was a good point. That should be correct. Sorry about that was a good point. Increase in tax and reduction in government spending. Yes, that'd be great. A great example that would cause a shift left in demand, a reduction in demand. Pandemics like COVID or market crashes, yes, that would shift it left. Financial crises, taxation, government spending, Yeah, so financial crises, change in taxation, government changes in government spending that would cause demand shock. Diseases, natural disasters, technological advances, yes, those were change demand. Pandemics, natural disasters, technological advances, significant change in government policy. Yeah, all good examples there. So Tareem, do you have a question? Okay. So aggregate supply. So it's focused on the output that firms will produce and sell. That's what it's focused on. So it's more focused on the firm's production in this case. So the aggregate supply curve, short run aggregate supply curve shows the positive relationship between price level and real GDP in the short run. The aggregate supply curve slopes upward. So the aggregate supply curve shows the total quantity of output, real GDP, that firms will produce and sell at each price level. The horizontal axis of the diagram shows real GDP. The vertical axis shows the price level. Price level is the average price of all goods and services produced in the economy. So what is aggregate supply? So the total quantity of output firms will produce and sell. Excellent. Good job. So yeah, as price level goes up, real GDP goes up because it's an incentive. They'll produce more when they get a higher price for it, which makes sense because if you're gonna get a higher price for something, you want to sell more of it because you're gonna get more profit out of it. So that makes sense. It's all based on incentives. People are more likely to produce more of something when they can get more money for it. So it's all based on the incentive for more profit. So that makes sense. Shifts in aggregate supply. So the aggregate supply curve shifts to the right as productivity increases and the price of key inputs falls, making a combination of lower inflation, higher output, and lower unemployment possible. The aggregate supply curve shifts to the left as the price of key inputs rises, making a combination of lower output, higher unemployment, and higher inflation possible. So potential GDP, the quantity that an economy can produce by fully employing its existing levels of labor, physical capital, and technology in the context of its existing market and legal institutions. When an economy is operating at its potential GDP, machines and factories are running at capacity, and the unemployment rate is relatively low at the natural rate of unemployment. Potential GDP is sometimes called full employment GDP. So what shifts aggregate supply to left? So productivity decreases or price of key inputs rises. So they can produce less. So it would shift left when they can produce less because it's more expensive, or they can produce less. Yeah. They might their technology might be less effective, or their inputs are more expensive. What shifts aggregate supply to the right? Productivity increases or key inputs price falls. Yes. Because if the price of key inputs fall, they can produce more now for the same costs. And if productivity increases, they can produce more because the technology is better. They can produce more, have better efficiency. So what is potential GDP? So it represents the company's capacity estimate of max sustainable output of the economy. That's correct. So you want to be at potential GDP. So your actual GDP should equal potential GDP. That's ideal. If actual GDP is less than potential GDP, you're in a recession. So you want to be at potential GDP. And then if actual GDP is greater than potential GDP, you're in expansion. But so potential GDP is where you should be, because if actual GDP is equal to potential GDP, the inflation is minimal. But if actual GDP is greater than potential GDP, inflation is too high and things are too unaffordable. So ideally, we want to be at potential GDP. And technology improvements, productivity improvements can increase our level of potential GDP. So that's beneficial. So we have more potential. As maximum output an economy can produce when all resources are used. Max productivity, max output an economy can produce, full employment GDP, the highest sustainable level of economic output with the utilization of all resources without the rise of inflation. So well done. What is potential GDP also known as? So full employment GDP, also I would accept full GDP. So full GDP and full employment GDP are correct. Real GDP